I am a 33-year-old man who currently lives in Austin, Texas. When I was 21 years old, I became a member of a Christian church in Killeen due to my stepfather being stationed on Fort Hood. I've always felt sensitive to the supernatural, but when my conversion came, I noticed darker spirits and demons. One night I stayed awake to watch TV. My family was asleep and then my girlfriend didn't come over, so I was bored. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I became sleepy and decided to call it a night. I went through my usual ritual of praying before I go to bed. Now, I'll give you a quick layout of my mom's house. When you first enter through the front door, you have to walk through a long foyer, and the first room you see is the living room, which also leads to the kitchen. Once you're out of the foyer area, you can turn right and go down a hallway that leads to the bedrooms. The living room is decorated like most are, furnished with pictures, coffee tables, couches, across from the TV, but my mother had a grandfather clock for decoration which was broken. The only purpose it served was to add character. As I had decided to go to bed, I figured I could pray in the living room and then head to my room. I left the TV on for the light, but muted it. As I began to pray, I felt like there was another presence in the room with me, but I paid it no mind. Suddenly, I heard the clock start to tick, but I was so wrapped up in the prayer that it didn't bother me. That was ready to change. The ticking noise began to grow louder and louder, and that's when it dawned on me that the clock was broken, and there's no way it should make any noise. I was set on finishing my prayer, but my concentration was already broken. So I stopped and got up and tried to look at the clock to see if the hands were moving, but could not see it because of the light of the TV was not enough. I cut on the light in the kitchen, but to no avail because the kitchen light was not close enough. I could still hear the ticking noise grow louder in my head, and the house felt as if the temperature was dropping, and this is in the middle of a Texas summer. Now, I had had enough and began to grow frustrated, so I walked across the living room to cut on the light. The light switch is on the right where the foyer ends, and the hallway to the rest of the house begins. When I reached the light switch, I felt like someone was watching me from down the hallway, and I turned my head to look, and what I saw made my hair stand up on all ends. I saw a very large dark figure standing there facing me. The only description I can give of it is what people claim that shadow people look like. Now, I've watched plenty of horror movies, and have yelled for the protagonist to run when they freeze and look at the monster, but instead of running, I know now what that horror feels like. Everything in my body and mind was telling me to run, scream, do something, but I was frozen from fear. I finally snapped out of it and began to pray. I cut the light on and figured it was gone. The temperature was no longer the same as before. The cold and awful ticking noise was gone. This was not my last time seeing something demonic or paranormal. Paranormal problems almost made me lose my mind. This all started when I was 16 years old. 7 years ago. I'm 22 now, but still, it haunts me. I can see things most other people can't, and what still scares me, it still happens all the time and it won't leave me alone. These black figures that I see never go away, no matter how hard I want them to. They just don't. The way they haunt me is unbearable. It seems they try to say something, but I can't understand them. I just hear a bunch of muffling. Sometimes it can be kind of annoying and loud, but if they get too close to you sometimes, it feels like you're not going to live the next day. And what really scares me is wherever I go, they follow me. My family doesn't believe me. They never have, but I wish they did. Because all they do now is cause me problems every now and then. I just find myself lost in my thoughts, or I feel like I'm somewhere else. I wish sometimes so hard they'd go away. These scary black figures make the weirdest noise. It sounds so loud, it almost ruptures my eardrums to the point of bleeding out. That's enough of my problem right now. They do harm to others when I'm not paying attention. Sometimes lately, I've been seeing very odd bruises on my mother, and she has no clue how they got there. Sometimes she thinks it's my stepdad's fault, but it's not. I recognize those marks. Scary enough to say that those aren't normal. And I hear my mom cry all the time because of them. She says it's very painful, yet she still doesn't believe me. I've walked around my house many times, and I've seen so many things missing or misplaced in different ways. It's so odd, yet hard to put my finger on it. Even living with my own problems is hard enough, especially for my mom. She has to deal with it more than I do. Besides the point, they still hurt my family. They'll probably haunt me for who knows how long. I just hope one day we can live here peacefully. That's one thing I wish for besides all the pain it's been causing most of my family. My family wants to move out because of all this, and mainly they think it's all my fault. Maybe it is. I don't know. I have no clue if I'm the only one who made these black figures. They follow me. I just don't know anymore. I try not to think of it too much. Sometimes, if I think really positive, which is really hard, they don't show up that often, but I still see them. There was a tunnel built by no human hands, located outside the boundaries of space and time, existing both in and out of tangible reality, enduring even beyond deep time. It wasn't made of stone, brick, or wood, but corrugated, rotting flesh and bones. It would pulsate like the very innards of a beast, against any natural law that might have been left. There was a dim, sickening glow coming from nowhere, preventing the living cave from diving into pitch-black darkness. The air was warm and saturated, impregnated with the overpowering stench of festering wounds. Its length was endless, stretching all the way through the fabric of reality and even beyond. The ceiling, if any, spanned farther than the reach of any being's spectrum of sight, from the floor to miles and miles upwards. Galleries of spinal cords, ribs, femurs, veins, and muscle, arranged in disarray, could be poorly discerned, but I could see, omnipresent, eyes on everywhere and nowhere. Lost within this landscape of utter gore, there was a light-haired girl, no older than 10. She had been there for months now. I could see within her mind, and though her eyes, to her, it felt like years. She had begun to forget how old she was, where she had come from. Even her name was fading from her memory. She felt like it has been decades. But how could anyone survive for so long without nourishment or respite of any sort? There was no food, no water anywhere to be found, no rest, and yet the girl felt the grip and possession of ravaging hunger. She became so hungry that her only survival instincts drove her. She tried to bite off a morsel from the walls. She tried to take a piece from the floor. She was so desperate with hunger that she would take a shred from the ceiling if she could reach it. Despite feeling and smelling like flesh, the girl couldn't grasp that the walls and floors were tough and dense, an impenetrable conglomerate of gore. Her teeth were shattered, fingernails ripped and torn from her during the struggle to obtain nourishment from the carnage. As the girl grappled with hunger for the meat in the walls, the snake came, rapacious for the girl's flesh. They were such strange creatures, feral jade-like beings, boneless monstrosities who were eyeless, perpetually seeking to satiate their voracity, moving in ways that defied the poorly established laws of physics within the living tunnel, paradoxically frantic and yet restrained as if on a leash or attached to something else, to someone else. The snakes had mouths stretching infinitely, displaying sickening, curling tongues, and hundreds of thousands of razor-sharp, needle-like fangs. The jade snakes wouldn't think or hesitate, just attack, instinctually striking with viciousness, only paralleled by malevolence, compelled by a gluttonous urge that apparently no prey would satisfy. Not a child, nor even an adult swallowed whole, would seize their pursuit for pabulum. I too ran from them, long ago. I remembered. I ran from them many times, for many years, even centuries. I ran. It had been thousands of years, or at least that is what it felt like. Regardless how much time had passed, I could still feel those fangs piercing through my flesh, lodging into my bones, violating and corrupting the marrow. Curling tongues voraciously flickering and wrapping around me, maiming me, mangling me, and yet not a single drop of blood would be spilled. I found myself missing the pain. I even yearned for the despair. Loneliness was the only feeling I had now. The jade serpents had a repugnant odor, a smell so putrid and intense it would permeate even beyond the tunnel of festering guts. It was as if they alone were the emissary of rot. Their fetor could be perceived long before the unnerving hisses reached the ears. The sonorous reverberating of the glottis rattle could be heard even through the rift. The blind boy could sense it. He could hear the hisses, the frantic darting movement of them, almost like a dance. It gave me hope. If their stench and maddening sounds could make out of this place, perhaps I could too. They charged at the paltry child, so innumerable that the snakes would have to fight over pieces of bone or a chunk of the girl's flesh. She ran forward, and with each step taken to save her life, with each beat of her desperate heart, memories would become less cloudy, and the girl recalled her name. It was Mia. Mia sobbed for her mother, eyes filled with tears. She had a mother, and now she remembered her very well. I wanted to embrace her, to take care of her, to keep the tender flesh of her tiny and frail body safe from the horrendous jade beasts. Did I want to be her father? Her mother? When I arrived here, I was her age. I remembered that. Yet, I couldn't even remember if I was a boy or a girl. I wanted to be her protector. I wanted to prevent little Mia from having the same fate I had. I couldn't remember if I ever had a father or a mother. This tunnel had feasted on my memories the same way its snakes would feed on flesh and bones. Clean cuts, wounds, and torn, sinew turning instantly into scar tissue, memories clouded and obscured, covered in thickness of a fog, lost permanently to oblivion. I went close to Mia, but she cried out even louder and decided to once again run in the only possible direction, forward, her little arms flailing in anguish as she choked on tears. She didn't make it far. She stumbled and fell. I came close and caressed her tiny face, covered in sweat and stained with tears. I stroked her soft hair. Neither of us could feel the touch. I felt pain in my heart. Anything was better than emptiness. Mia stood up and ran again. She kept running with everything she had, pushing her legs way beyond its limits. Ultimately, she fell on the ground. She got up, ran again, and fell again. This time, she could hear the hisses. The malodor from the snakes was so strong that Mia almost threw up. She covered her mouth as the snakes attacked, 1,000 of them at the same time, her screams so loud and desperate. It felt like they could reverberate through many realities. It felt like her screams could create rifts of their own. Her tears so profuse and desperate. Mia created a rift within me. She fainted and another week passed. Or maybe it was 1,000 years. Perhaps a month. It didn't matter. It must have been a nightmare. A shared phantasm. I couldn't remember any gods, but I tried to pray. I prayed for this whole nightmare not to be real. In some way, my prayers seemed to have been answered. I could slip through the rift. I had become lost within her memories. Perhaps, I was wandering along the dark corridors of fragmented, unrequited dreams. It wouldn't be the first time overeating had this effect over Mia. After all, her mother allowed 3 times the amount of hot cocoa and gingerbread she usually had on a Sunday. But now, she was also allowed it before going to bed. Is it some sort of celebration? Mia asked with bright eyes. No, Mia. It is just a way to show you how much Daddy and I love you, was the reply. Mia would not smell blood, nor the rot, or festering flesh, but instead, the sweet scent of steamy hot cocoa and warm gingerbread. She was home, and I was with her. Don't you fill our princess up with candies. I'm fixing some steaks for dinner. The voice was unmistakable, even though I had never heard before. The accent was familiar. It was Mia's father. And since when we were able to afford steaks, Mr. Chef? Mia's mother sounded joyful. Since I got a promotion to the lower levels, and, as funny as it may sound, a raise. Oh, in this case, our Christmas list will be longer. Hey Mom, Dad, stop arguing. They weren't arguing, even for a little girl. It was obvious that her parents were having a good time. After so many bad things that happened to the family, now it felt like luck was finally on their side. I could see each and every hardship they endured. I could feel it. So, what will my little lady wish for on Christmas? Mia's father was now embracing her. A Christmas tree, was the reply without hesitation or second thought. This brought a sad smile to her father's face and tears to his eyes. He remembered the previous years when he wasn't able to afford any gifts, not even a small Christmas tree. Knowing how much his daughter loved Christmas trees, he got one from a pawn shop. It was entirely bright pink. Straight from a famous brothel in Maine, said the owner. It cost him $2 and some cruel jokes that would accompany him on the way back home. Whatever you want, my little princess, said the father, embracing Mia again. Whatever you want. His heartbeats were audible now. Even to me, she closed her eyes, feeling safe, safer than she had ever felt before. But when Mia opened them again, gone was her father, her mother, and their room. Nothing was left but the stench of putrefied wounds. The snakes attacked her. In each encounter with the snakes, Mia would become mauled and wounded more savagely. She now walked with a limp, and still yet no blood spilt, not a solitary drop. It was as if she was born missing an entire limb, without internal organs, in collapsed gaps where her flesh and bones should be. The serpent's venom was more like a saliva, sealing the ruptured through, left behind in material translucent and thinner than skin. Mia felt dizzy and feverish as the jade snakes once again drew near. Unlike the countless times before, they weren't rushing. They didn't have to. Mia wanted to run, but her right leg felt numb and went limp. There was no hope of escape, not even if there was a rift right in front of her. Mia then thought the snakes might have known her leg had become useless. Perhaps the unearthly creatures were savoring their victory as their prey was growing weak and finally lying motionless. I rushed towards the snakes. Since when had I, myself, means to fend them off? It didn't matter. I would protect her at all costs. Mia was my daughter now. Mia cried out in pain, or was it despair? I did also, but only for a moment. Now beyond time and space, there was an ambiance in oblivion. A thought gripped me. Had I finally made it out of the tunnel, perhaps I could have taken Mia with me. Were we free? Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and have beautiful nightmares.